Bonjour, I'm Gonorrhea. Let's learn 10 ways that Russia leads and China follows. Have you ever noticed that in modern geopolitics, China is to Russia what the UK is to the US? The first country follows behind the second country, like an obedient poodle follows his master. Trust me, you're not imagining things. Furthermore, this is not just a 21st century phenomenon. China has been following in the footsteps of Russia for a very long time, since at least the early 20th century, when both were empires,
giant,
backwards, and really needing to wake the fuck up. This historical relationship between the two countries is an open secret. Everyone sort of knows this, but neither side wants to acknowledge it. So many common points, from its founding leaders to its socio-economic policies, to how they vote in the UN, and much more. So, in this video, I explore the 10 ways that China has followed in Russia's footsteps in the last 100 years. Number 1. Loss of empire. In the first 2 decades of the 20th century, both Russia and China were empires, enormous, multi-ethnic, authoritarian,
and crumbling.
Serfdom was very real, if not officially. Most common citizens were not allowed to move out of their villages easily. Infrastructure was either non-existent or in shambles, and they both had fatally lost wars. Russia against Japan, and then Germany in the First World War, and China against the UK in the Opium Wars, and then later against Japan. Number 2. Both had 2 very charismatic founders that introduced a new era. Russia got Vladimir Lenin, who introduced communism. China got Sun Yat-sen, who introduced nationalism. They both founded political parties that would go on to have a giant impact on world history. The Communist Party of the USSR and the Kuomintang. Both of them, for better or worse, died very soon after gaining power. Also a side note, that Mao suit, it wasn't made by Mao nor by Sun Yat-sen. That suit is from the late 19th century socialists, which was then adopted by the Bolsheviks, which was then adopted by Sun Yat-sen. Again, that so-called Mao suit is not a Chinese invention. It's a late 19th century design by Western European socialists. Come on, people. Number 3. Both countries had a second generation of leaders that tried but failed to succeed Lenin and Sun. Lenin was followed by Leon Trotsky, who everyone thought was the natural successor because he was educated, intelligent, and had founded the Red Army. And Sun was followed by Chiang Kai-shek, who had married Sun's daughter and who was a generalissimo with real military leadership experience, just like Trotsky. Both of them committed atrocities against their people. Both would find themselves eventually defeated. Who defeated them? You already know the answer. Number 4. The third generation of successors, the real pimps, Mao Zedong and Joseph Stalin. It's hard out here for these two. These two pimps had so much in common, things that neither the Russians or Chinese seem to want to admit. So here it goes. They were both geniuses who began as outsiders. Both had very thick accents. Mao had a very thick Hunan accent whenever he spoke Chinese Mandarin. As a result, other Chinese leaders sort of looked down on Mao. Stalin had a very thick Georgian accent when he spoke Russian. As a result, other Bolshevik leaders saw Stalin as part of an ethnic minority instead of a fully Russian person. And in fact, Stalin was put in charge of the People's Commissariat for Nationalities. This word, nationalities, would be later adopted by Chinese to refer to their 55 other minor ethnic groups. It wouldn't be until the late 20th century when the Chinese Communist Party would get rid of the Soviet term nationalities and adopt the Western term ethnicities. Besides their accent, both Mao and Stalin were deeply insecure and would become incredibly paranoid once in power. But there was a difference. Stalin knew how to hide his paranoia, his distrust, his hatred. On the outside, Stalin was always the charming, smiling motherfucker. Mao, in contrast, was publicly berating those he disagreed with and used coarse language to hit back at his underlings. In other words, Both had heavy feels, but Mao wouldn't shut the up about it. Number 5. Both Stalin and Mao won a titanic military struggle. However, there's also a difference. The Second World War in Europe was won mostly by the Soviet Union. We know this because we know that 4 out of 5 Nazis were killed by the USSR. Mao, in contrast, did not defeat the Japanese in the Second World War. That was handled mostly by the US. And also, Mao really won against Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist forces because the nationalists were exhausted and destroyed after the war with the Japanese. It was the nationalists and not the Chinese communists who took the brunt of the Japanese military aggression. In other words, both Stalin and Mao are massively overrated in their military achievements in World War II.
Like, seriously, guys.
Number 6, both Stalin and Mao deliberately induced famines, all in the name of political correctness. Stalin caused the Holodomor and related famines in the early 1930s on purpose. Mao also caused the Great Leap Forward famine, which killed even more people than Holodomor. Except, today the Chinese pretend that Mao didn't know what was happening. Bullshit. Guys, Mao knew what was happening. And yet he still continued the Great Leap Forward. And also, why do you think he purged General Peng Dehuai when Peng revealed the truth about the famine? I highly encourage everyone to pick up the book Mao's Great Famine by Frank Dicotter. It tells the truth, not nationalist myth. Mao knew, guys. Number 7, purges. Purges. Remember when I said both Stalin and Mao were insecure and paranoid? No one was safe. If you weren't politically correct, then you were fit. If you were politically correct, then you could still be fit. The mere accusation from your neighbor that you were a secret capitalist, or that you said the name of the dear leader in vain, or that you pooped the wrong way, it could all land you in the concentration camp. Even high-ranking military geniuses were not safe. Chinese military heroes like Peng Dehuai or Liu Shaoqi would follow in the footsteps of Mikhail Tukhachevsky and Georgy Zhukov. Of course, all this lovely purge would go hand in hand with number 8, the most spectacular personality cult the world has ever seen. People today think that what we see in North Korea is so unique and unprecedented. You guys are clearly not old enough to see what we saw in China in the 60s and 70s, when countless Chinese sucked Mao's dick as he came in everyone's mouth, or what we saw in the USSR 3 decades earlier, when Stalin taught young Mao how to make everyone suck your dick as you come bucket loads of sperm in everyone's mouth. So, who had the better personality cult, Stalin or Mao? It's a wash. And now we move on to the modern era. Number 9. Vladimir Putin and his follower, Xi Jinping. At first, Putin had a good relationship with the West. George Bush, the most entertaining president in recent decades, said he saw his soul. So I guess he must be a good guy. And then things went south. NATO accepted Poland and the Baltic countries. Putin invaded Georgia. The West promoted color revolutions in Ukraine and Central Asia. Putin invaded Crimea.
All fun stuff.
And now, Putin has silenced opposition parties in Russia, made his country even more nationalist and anti-Western, and scared the f*** out of Russia's many small neighboring countries, such that NATO is experiencing a surge of popularity. Does that remind you of someone? That's right, China under Xi Jinping. This guy is so much like Putin. He comes out of nowhere, initially seems friendly with the US. Remember the WikiLeaks documents saying Xi Jinping spent time in the US during the 80s and that he liked certain Hollywood movies such as Saving Private Ryan?
But then starts the crackdown.
And no, I'm not talking about his anti-corruption campaign. I'm talking about the clampdown on all activists and lawyers, Tibetans and Uyghurs, and the concentration of power, making Xi stronger than any Chinese since Mao. While Putin was busy invading Georgia and Crimea, Xi was busy making aggressive military moves across South China Sea and the East China Sea, scaring the f*** out of its smaller Asian neighbors, such that even Philippines and Vietnam and Japan, 3 countries that historically hated US military bases in their country, are now suddenly very okay with the US military staying a little bit longer in the area. Just like Putin, Xi Jinping has relied on nationalism, xenophobia, anti-Western hostility, and state media propaganda to help distract the people from what he's really doing. And last but not least, number 10, thanks to Putin and Xi Jinping, the average Russian and Chinese have become insecure jerks, more aggressive and defensive than ever before. Does everyone want to copy the Americans?